Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. Following our recent musings about IP novels and novelisations, we finally reached the object of our inquiries. Well, almost anyway, as this will be a two-parter. Not too strange for us, though, as it's not unusual for us to do 3 episodes on a 150-page Moorcock book, and The Coming of the Terrifiles is a fairly chunky one by Moorcock standards. But yes, we have built up to this, and we are now here to talk about Mike's foray into the written word universe of that most iconic and enduring British TV character, Doctor Who. Now going on 61 years old, this TV show was a touchstone for multiple generations of people from its inception in 1963, and I doubt that I really need to go into any introductory detail about the show or the character, other than to say that when I was a nipper, it was watched by over 13 million of the televiewing public in the UK at its height. An incredible number by today's standards. OK, we didn't have a 4th channel back then, and one channel was only broadcasting for about half the day, but nevertheless, its reach was immense. At one point in the 1970s, Doctor Who did top 16 million for one episode, but the other main channel, ITV, was on strike, so that was a unique circumstance. That's probably baffling for our US listeners, but yes, in my childhood, we had 2 full-time and 1 part-time channel, and even then, when I say full-time, I mean up until around midnight when they closed down with the national anthem. No wonder then that after its cancellation in the early 80s when it was only reaching 3 million, that it left a gulf for so many fans and people yearning for some exciting genre telly. There was a one-off TV movie in 1996, of course, starring Paul McGann, an interesting effort that failed to reboot the property as a series, before the BBC themselves did successfully relaunch the show in 2005. And if you're interested in reading in depth how that came about, I can recommend the book Back to the Vortex by J. Sean Lyons. I seem to recall reading another book about the development of the Paul McGann TV movie too that detailed a lot of the proposals for the series, including a weird backstory about his dad Ulysses and lots of other odd Dalek stuff. I can't remember what that book was though, so if you do, answers on a postcard please. But for Who fans, like me, in those intervening years, and even before the original cancellation, we had the novels. First, the Target books. Target was an imprint of W.H. Allen Publishers and behind the lucrative novelisations of over 150 television serials. For years, this was the only way Who fans could revisit previously broadcast stories or even experience them for the first time and, even after the advent of home video releases, discover the stories that had been long lost due to erased tapes at the Beeb. These books, with their vivid Chris Achilleos cover illustrations, were so iconic, the brand was revamped in recent years and novelisations of new Doctor Who episodes added to the line. When the original Target line had ceased production, the rights were obtained by Virgin and the torch was passed to a new generation of authors to produce the New Adventures and Missing Adventures lines, probably as a result of the Who fandom maturing and, with no serials having been broadcast for some years, these were able to be aimed at a more adult audience. From 1991 to 1999, over 150 original novels were churned out by this line, including multiple spin-off stories focusing on original companion characters and some created specifically for this line. Eventually, the BBC reclaimed the brand in written form, kicking off with a new original story by Terence Dicks, a stalwart of not only the Target line, but a former writer and script editor on the show in the 60s and 70s, and the mill has continued to churn ever since. And we haven't even mentioned the Big Finish line of original full-cast audio dramas that, including spin-offs about companions and Daleks and Torchwood and other stuff, now number in the several hundreds since they launched their operations in 1999. So, despite what some would term the wilderness years, the Doctor Who fan base was pretty well served, and even more so since the 2005 relaunch, and now they've got Disney money too. Doctor Who, despite its quaint, wobbly-setted and very idiosyncratically British low-budget TV origins, is the very essence of a modern IP juggernaut. So what made Mike dip into this realm of writing for hire for an established property? Here's a bit of an article he wrote for The Guardian back in 2009 about how this came to pass. He said, "I have to admit that, while I watched most of his episodes as the Doctor, I disliked William Hartnell, the first occupant of the TARDIS, who barked with the authority of his sergeant from the army game. Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor, brought an absent-minded quirkiness to the character which stayed with him at his best. John Pertwee took him back to his more authoritarian mode, and then came the glory years of Tom Baker. Reasonable complexity, wit, and an aptitude for ad-libbing, which was wonderful to watch, but must have been murder for the other actors. Every Saturday was organised around the Doctor's adventures in time and space, with plenty of hiding behind available furniture. You couldn't actually get behind our sofa. And there was even a visit to White City to meet Tom Baker and the Daleks in real life. I remained unimpressed by 2001 A Space Odyssey, but I'd go to considerable lengths not to miss an episode of The Brain of Morbius. I think I like the character mostly because he remains largely unrationalised and ambiguous. Russell T Davies understood this and made it the Doctor's most attractive quality. All lasting characters, from Richard III on, have at least a duality which makes them appeal to new generations. Like Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, and Becky Sharp, the Doctor is infinitely interpretable. When I was first offered the chance to write an original Doctor Who novel, I hesitated. I felt I'd had enough fun and should settle down to the autobiographical stuff I'd mapped out for the next year or two. Then I realised not only I might enjoy writing an original adventure, I could also take a look at what a character who has become part of our national folklore has come to mean. I could do, in fact, what SF does best for an intelligent, knowing audience. So I told my agent to go ahead and draw up the contract. Now the vast potential of what I can write is beginning to dawn on me. Far from thinking in terms of fun, I've become a little scared. All time and space is open to me. I have to mix comedy and melodrama while telling an epic adventure story featuring a complex protagonist capable of ranging across the entire multiverse. I'm increasingly overawed as I consider what I must live up to. Hardcore fans are already questioning my qualifications. I can only hope I'm equal to the job. It does warm my heart that after his distaste for the direction for the Doctor with Jon Pertwee, which I should point out I don't vibe with, I fucking love Pertwee, Mike did come back for it with Tom Baker. In a post from the Moorcock's Miscellany boards years back, he wrote, "I loved the Tom Baker Doctor Who's, which is probably what I made Harlan watch, when there was a certain chaotic element to the series. Tom B, high by his own admission on Valium and Scotch, was ad-libbing his own lines, a lot, on top of having some great scripts. You can tell, if you're so disposed, by the way other actors appear to stumble when he either hasn't given them the right cue line, or has gone off at a tangent which is cracking them up. I'd always wanted him for a TV version of Joseph Kiss in Mother London. If they don't hurry up and make it, not that they've asked yet, the bugger won't be able to come from Toulouse, or is it Toulon, to shoot the scenes." Oh, what a tantalising proposition that was. Tom Baker as Joseph Kiss. Well, sadly we don't have that, or a television adaptation of Mother London, but we do have his take on the Doctor. For this episode, Miles has been back aboard, so get those fucking stupid question marks off your collar or tank top or whatever it is you're wearing. Smooth down your crushed velvet jacket or Edwardian frock coat, or get some nice tweeds and an Argyle cardigan or something instead. And join us in the cloister room as we dive into the coming of the Terraphiles and see what happens when Moorcock's multiverse and this staggering behemoth of an IP collide. Yeah, we are back in Derry and Tom's. And if from the very outset we do sound mildly amused already, you know, it's not because we're high on our own supply, but it's just because Miles spotted a book on the shelf behind me called You Nice Bastard. And we've just been talking about the Terry Sneed trilogy, which kicked off with Sir You Bastard, New English Library crime specials about copper Terry Sneed. One day perhaps, we'll do Sir You Bastard. Because why not? It's a New English Library book, so why wouldn't we? Miles, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Always glad to be here.
What have you been up to?
Oh, let's see. You know, just watching copious amounts of Star Trek, as always. This last few days, I've been getting the viewing in for our next episode, which is going to be cosmic horror themed. And who knows, we may do a little skew afterwards to watch some episodes of Space 1999, which I feel does cosmic horror so well.
Oh, yeah. And lots of people love Dragon's Domain as the cosmic horror peak of Space 1999. Don't get me wrong, big fan of Dragon's Domain, but I'm a bigger fan, and I think that the most horrifying episode of Space 1999 is the one with Peter Bowles that we mentioned on our last episode. Yeah.
The one where the conceptual artist, but a conceptual artist of death.
That's right. Yeah. find a floating asteroid. He's basically a psychopathic madman painter and murderer who's been sealed away by his people inside this asteroid with all of his paintings. And, I'd like to say that Peter Bowles is horrific in the role. Actually, Peter Bowles is pretty good in the role. Sans moustache, wearing stack heels to make him look taller. But the most horrifying thing is the actual paintings. They're terrifying.
They are. I was also thinking, even though it's not cosmic horror, that one episode where Brian Blessed melts. Because sadly, that might be one of the few chances we ever get to talk about Sir Brian of Blessed on a Star Trek podcast, because it was possibly the one genre franchise he never appeared in, despite Patrick Stewart's best attempts.
Yeah, it's a real shame that, because he was doing a lot of TV sci-fi. Of course, he did Blake 7, which we talked about last time around, and that episode of Space 1999 he did, which is, I think was he in that more than once? Because I know he was in the opening episode of season 2, Metamorphosis, or the Metamorph. The Metamorph. Can't remember.
So I've never actually seen season 2 of Space 1999.
In some ways, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does have some high spots, but it's not a patch on season 1.
Depths of a Domain.
Right. I'm going to have to go and do a rewatch at some point, because obviously I've forgotten the fact that he appears in season 1. He definitely plays the shapeshifter Maya's dad.
Yeah.
In the first episode of season 2, complete with wacky eye makeup to mark him out as alien and strange bumpy eyebrows.
There is some fantastic 70s eye makeup in Space 1999. I think I've seen the episode of Christopher Lee where he is all glam as fuck.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he looks amazing. And I think the Peter Cushing one as well, he's got heavy eye makeup and a fantastic wig. Oh yeah, it had everybody on it, didn't it? Space 1999 season 1. It was terrific. It's great. We'll probably do it at some point because, of course, as we've talked about before on our other episodes where we've touched on IPs, EC Tub and Michael Butterworth both wrote Space 1999 novelisation, so maybe one for the future at some point. I must say, there is probably an entire side podcast in purely doing sci-fi TV IP spin-off novels. But, we'll cover this because, of course, we are here to talk about The Coming of the Terraphiles by Michael Moorcock. We probably won't get through it all in one sitting, I don't think, because there's a few things to talk about. So this is probably part 1 of 2. But what is the latest with Casual Trek beyond what you're doing next? What have you covered recently?
We did an episode based on Q, which is the last one. Currently the episode that we are editing is on AI. And naughty artificial intelligences. We recently did our Search for Spock episode because we're doing all the movies in sequential order. So in another 10 episodes time, we get to watch my wife's favorite movie with the whales, and where everyone is having a really good time. Yeah, I'm admittedly behind on my current Trek watching because, Star Trek is already my side hustle. I can't OD on Trek.
Well, yeah,
I'm still
you certainly do
behind in Discovery.
Yeah, you do fill your time up, don't you? Before we move on, I just need to ask, your episode on Q, what did you make of what they did with Q in the Picard series?
I have seen the first 2 episodes of that season of Picard, and that was it. Because
very wise.
We did 2 TNG, and we did his first appearance on Voyager, where we have another member of the Continuum who is arguing for the right to die. That gets incredibly serious in the discussion. But no, we watched the one where Q gets robbed of his powers, and the episode where Riker gets given Q godlike powers, because as we all know, Gene Roddenberry never met a person he couldn't give godlike powers and then be brought down so low because, as always, man is better than God with proper application of fists and punching.
Now, it's a long, long time since I've watched any TNG, and I'm probably thinking there are probably episodes of TNG I never even saw because, of course, back in the day when that was on the box, it was 23 episodes a season, and there were 7 seasons. I don't think I saw every single one, but some of the Riker-centric episodes are actually my favourite episodes because Riker was, in many ways, like a sort of lame, in the best possible way, like, 70s TV show hero transposed to the 1980s in this super progressive future who was trying to sort of do the best he could to shag women without overstepping the bounds of politeness and cultural sensitivities.
I don't know. I think watching it with watching Riker with 2022 hindsight, I feel like Riker might be the most progressive male character who still has all the atypical male traits, because he's clearly horny. He clearly wants to. He's not met a woman he doesn't want to have sex with.
Mm-hmm.
But at every point, he is nothing less than respectable, charming, and he always, anytime he gets turned down, he always just seems to be like, nope, that's fair, you're missing out, but that's fair. I'll be home with my trombone.
This is why he's such a wonderful character, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he toes the line of cultural niceties and norms willingly and happily and with good grace and learns from it.
And also, he just has when he gets the beard, he just has such a charming smile.
What does he do with his Q powers? I can't remember.
He ages up Wesley to an entirely different actor 10 years older. Because, boy, did they miscalculate how Will Wheaton would look in 10 years' time. He gives Geordi his eyesight back, and he gives Worf a female Klingon playmate, to which Worf then gets to deliver one of the best lines ever in Star Trek when he gets asked, Worf, is this how Klingons have, is this your idea of Klingon sex? And Worf just goes, this is sex! Which, season 1 of Star Trek Next Generation isn't as good as it will get, but is trying earnestly so hard to be just so family friendly, but then also utterly weird and sometimes gory and insane, that it's this wonderful juxtaposition that the show never really has when it works out its stride. Because it's trying so hard.
Yeah, there are a couple of episodes, I think, from maybe season 2 that I do remember. We will get onto Doctor Who at some point, but we've got to talk Trek for a while. I do remember one, of course, is the conspiracy with the alien slugs from the far end of the galaxy that ended on a cliffhanger but was never followed up, which had the exploding head, which was that's remarkable.
Season 1, and that was definitely cut out of the BBC 2 pre-Watershed.
Yeah, that was remarkable. I think it might have. I can't even remember if we saw that on TV or whether we ended up seeing it on VHS or something. Because one time in Blockbusters, I was one of these people who used to go to the video shop and buy ex-rental VHS tapes. So the day when I moved in with Phil in Bradford, I had to ship hundreds and hundreds of old VHS tapes off to the charity shop, and there were bumper 4-episode VHS tapes that you could rent out from Blockbusters. So a lot of the ones we watched for the first time from those tapes. But the other one I remember, which was not graphic, but was just fun and a bit sleazy and a bit sexy and a bit silly with Riker, was the one where he goes on the exchange trip on the Klingon bird of prey, which is just fantastic. And he has to basically out Klingon the Klingons. And at one point is sitting eating some gach or heart of tag or whatever, and he's got 2 horny Klingon women giving him the eye. And he's giving it right back.
And they're asking if he wants to be breastfed, and Riker's just like, I won't say no. I won't say no.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Incredible.
That one. Did you ever watch The X-Files?
Yeah,
back in the 90s.
I watched the first 2 seasons, and then I think there was a cliffhanger with the alien conspiracy business with a railway truck with loads of alien bodies in it.
Yeah.
And a cliffhanger that at the start of the following season, was Mulder in bed having strange trip because some Native American shaman was doing something or other to try and... I can't really remember. But from that point onwards, it was such a cop-out and it was so plainly obvious that they weren't going to do anything with this plot. And it was... I gave up on it. I gave up on the X-Files.
Yeah.
I liked the individual episodes. I liked the relationship between Mulder and Scully. But what I don't like is when TV seeds an arc and then it becomes plainly obvious they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah.
And there's no plan. So I ended up tanking it.
I once got challenged by a friend to try and explain the X-Files mythology on a 10-minute car ride to the shops. And I wasn't sure, like, right, do I begin in chronology of the show or do I begin with the whole of human history? Because I had to go right back to the dawn of man, to when aliens first started appearing in prehistoric Earth. And at that point I said, no, I give up. Lost is easier to try and decipher than the X-Files of mythology ever gets.
Yeah, well, Lost is another series that I thought, oh, this is good. And then when it became plainly obvious, they were just blowing it out of their ass constantly. I gave up on that as well. Yeah,
I enjoyed Lost when it was on because it was something my stepdad and I used to watch together during just a dark period of our lives. It was that and Fringe.
Yeah.
Which was so much damn fun. And I've always wanted to go back and rewatch Lost because now I know how it ends. I want to know if I'll enjoy the journey through the same way I did. But at the same time, it's never going to be the same as when I first watched it. And I've always worried I'll kind of go back and then color my memories on my fondness of watching it at the time. So I've never actually gone back to the new Battlestar Galactica. It feels like such a moment in time.
Yeah.
Can you really go back? Can you really go back and just kind of mentally go back into that post 9/11 kind of zeitgeist?
Yeah, there's a real level of cynicism and, applied grit, which gets a little bit tedious with that Battlestar Galactica series. But it also combines that with they were just blowing stuff out their ass by the end.
Yeah, they're making it up.
Yeah. All fiction is made up, isn't it? But I always like to think that when I'm being encouraged to engage in something long term, and I'm being drip fed a storyline arc, that they might actually be building to something and they know what they're doing. And Battlestar Galactica is another example where I think they realised that at some point they had to swing for the fences because they didn't know what they're going to do, and it was a swing and a miss.
Yeah,
it was a swing and a miss. The journey was okay. The journey was okay. It had high points.
The aesthetics and what they're trying to do with a more realistic approach to space opera, especially with Western TV, where it's basically magic on how the technology works. It was, it's good to see. It's no Space 1999. And it's how realistic can we make this? How stupid can we make this? And just how sometimes despairing of the entire state of the human condition can we make this?
Yeah. I mean, Space 1999 is a good example of a show where the car conceit is stupid. You just have to divorce yourself from that and think this is a 70s TV show that gives us an episodic week by week, struggle for survival. If you can get past the initial idea of the moon essentially traveling around and encountering a different star system every week, if you can get past that, everything else is gravy. Everything else is sweet. Sweet as a nut, mate. I love it.
Or if you grew up watching classic Doctor Who, you're just like, yep, okay, I'm going with this. Okay, Daleks, Ice Warriors, whatever. You can throw me the weirdest shit, and I'll eat it up with a knife and fork.
Yeah, I mean, we were only talking about Blake 7 last time around with, all this standard by 7 and all this business, it was just words, it was just words. None of it had anything behind it.
Blake 7 I love because it takes itself so seriously for so long, and then sometimes it just devolves into sheer camp.
Yeah.
At the same time, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think once you get to the point, in seasons 1 and 2, it's very tabard heavy. But once you get to season 3 where Tarrant arrives and they all look like disco Robin Hood, you know, and you've got Servalan camping it up like
Oh yeah,
weird space witch Liza Minnelli sex fascist. Oh, you know, you just got to go with it, haven't you?
I've always heard Servalan best described as Himmler from World War II if Himmler were played by Joan Collins in full US soap opera mode.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. You know, and it's a terrible thing to say. The only way I would argue with that is because I can't admit that some kind of strange space fascist Himmler played by Joan Collins would get me aroused. But you know, I guess that's life, isn't it?
It's like with Diana and V. You're like, yeah, she's a hideous lizard alien who wants to eat you. But I'm not gonna say no immediately.
That's right. And you know, the big hair with Diana. The bigger the hair, the harder it is to resist her. Yeah. It's sad. But let's get on to Doctor Who then. Now, as anyone will know if they follow you on social media, you've been doing a grand rewatch, or in some cases, first watch of Doctor Who from year dot, from 1963 onwards. Tell us about your journey so far.
Oh, God. Last week, I finished Power of the Daleks, the very first Patrick Troughton story, and we're about to get into my favorite periods of Who, which is, you know, the Doctor and Jamie on an ever-rotating series of adventures in bases in the distant past or the distant future, and monsters galore.
Yeah.
But I have really enjoyed watching the William Hartnell era sequentially, because Hartnell's never been my favorite era of the show, because mostly it is truly down to I was never a fan of the pure historical stories. Just give me monsters and spaceships any day.
Yeah.
But also that's when you get like the high volume of missing episodes. And so just deciding to watch it last year really opened my eyes up to just how William Hartnell's characterization of the Doctor really shifts from the first stories where he's pretty much the the villain of the show, with Ian being the hero, to pretty much how the Doctor becomes, which is like this elderly science hero who is grumpily saving the universe. Despite every opportunity, he just wants to get in a TARDIS and leave. First time it ever really gets dangerous, which leads to the TARDIS getting either stolen or sabotaged or dropped down a very large hole a lot. And I had a whale of a time, and I really enjoyed those pure historical stories that I've been poo-pooing for so long.
Yeah, I suppose for people who aren't really Doctor Who followers, or people who listen to this because they dig the books that we talk about, but they're not really big Doctor Who fans. Of course, a lot of the original Doctor Who was recorded onto tapes that were then later deleted because the BBC didn't have a policy of storing old television shows. So there's a huge amount of historically important British television that is just lost to history. And some of it was saved. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, like, you have stuff like the very first Quatermass serial, the Quatermass Experiment, which, like, 2 episodes, I think, like, some early Dad's Army, a lot of Spike Milligan's Q series, and a lot of the early kind of satirical shows by people who would then go on to do Monty Python and the Goodies have been lost to time.
So, as a result, what we had years and years and years ago, especially when Doctor Who first started getting released on VHS tapes, is you had some complete stories, because I think we've referred to this before. There was a time when the only way you could really watch old Doctor Who before things like UK TV Gold, whatever it was called at the time, started broadcasting them in the 90s on early satellite TV, was to pick up VHS tapes. And you had some complete stories, but there were some stories that were completely lost, and there were others where you got special double VHS tapes of odd episodes, which were bridged with like Link VT done by someone like Colin Baker, with super terrible visual effects and super terrible shitty music that was so bargain basement. It was incredible, but that was the only way to watch these odd episodes.
I've got some great memories of
Yeah.
some of those, like The Invasion,
Yeah.
where you're missing 2 episodes, and then like you get through an episode, and then it cuts to a much elderly Nicholas Courtney sitting on like a stool in a blue studio, going like it's bloody Jack Honorian,
Yeah.
having go, and then the doctor and Jamie escaped Packer,
Yeah.
and then they discovered that the Cybermen were behind everything.
Yeah.
Can you say Cybermen, boys and girls?
Yeah, there was one where it was odd episodes of different stories, and all of the VT links were done by Deborah Watling, with shelves of old tapes behind her, and she was, you could tell she hadn't had a TV job for a long, long time because she was giving it everything, and she would say things like, "And then a tape was discovered in the strangest of places, Hong Kong," as if Hong Kong is like, you know, the seventh moon of Pluto or something. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. But of course, over time, a lot of these things, like, they'd be found in TV stations in Africa, where copies of them had been sent to Zimbabwe for broadcast on Rhodesian television or something. So over time, some of them have been patched back together, and some, of course, they've had animated episodes done to be slotted in to replace them. And there are a handful. I think Enemy of the World and the one
The
with
Web of Fear.
Web of Fear. Yeah, they're either complete or almost complete now, aren't they? Or they've had odd episodes with animation inserted. But for years and years, there was only 2 episodes you could ever watch of Web of Fear, and it was 6 episodes long, I think. Or maybe 7. Was Web of Fear 7 episodes? I can't remember.
I think it's a 6 or a 7. And but just God, I just remember when they announced that, I was ecstatic. Even now, like, sometimes, I'll be honest, it's going to sound really sad. Sometimes I've had a really bad day and I come home and I look at my shelves and I see like Web of Fear and Enemy of the World and go, there is still some good in the world.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe one day we'll get more of the Dalek Master Plan or something like that.
I was not a fan of the Dalek Master Plan.
How many episodes are you able to watch?
You are able to watch, I think it's episode 2, episode 5, and episode 8 or episode 9. So you've got some stuff on a jungle planet, some stuff on an entirely different jungle planet, and then you have Daleks fighting ancient Egyptians while the monk mugs to the camera.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't sound great, does it?
It's a drag, and it's not interesting Daleks. It's Terry Nation Daleks are best in everything, and not like the story I finished watching, which was Power of the Daleks, where I'm like, oh right, Daleks can be interesting if you actually bother to write them interestingly.
So tell us about, because of course one of the big holy grails for me was The Chase, and I remember getting The Chase on VHS and watching it, and it was one of the biggest disappointments. One of the biggest televisual disappointments in my life, I think, with the exception of Stupid Dalek, which I thought was absolutely incredible.
I had that, like, because it came in a tin with Remembrance of the Dalek. So you had like one of the best Doctor Who stories ever, with that one which you can't watch its in entirety anymore because it has archival footage of the Beatles playing like live on a talk show.
Yeah.
And so
Ian Chesterton's Little Dance. Yeah.
Oh god, so stupid Dalek. But no, I meant, like, let's see, I first started just watching the show in '93 when they were repeating some of it for the 30th anniversary. And my parents debated that since I had already seen Star Wars, if I would actually like Doctor Who, because Doctor Who doesn't look as expensive as Star Wars, but they made a mistake and they introduced me to Doctor Who, and my life was set from then on.
Yeah.
So I grew up on those Target books and the old VHS tapes.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in many ways a Who diehard until Colin Baker. And it's certainly not Colin Baker's fault, because, you know, I've read and heard interviews post that he didn't want to wear that fucking stupid outfit either. It was forced on him by John Nathan Turner. I'm sure he wasn't responsible. He won't have been responsible for some of the just most terrible music choices in that series. I rewatched the Cyberman story where they go back to Telos.
Attack of the Cybermen.
Attack of the Cybermen, which on the surface of it, interesting idea, interesting story, but the very first episode where they have moments of levity punctuated by this is a comedy beat piece of music. Just absolutely awful. Just the worst. The absolute worst. I really felt for Colin Baker, but it just, to some degree, it became a little bit unwatchable for me. And I'm one of those Who people who didn't get on with the Sylvester McCoy era at all. So I remember watching Remembrance of the Daleks on the TV, and the bit with Ace and the baseball bat, I turned off, and I never watched Doctor Who. I never watched Doctor Who again after that until Paul McGann, probably.
No.
Yeah, it just all that stuff just killed Doctor Who for me. I understand it was a good idea. It was a good idea to try and expand the lore of the Daleks, and all of the Dalek Civil War stuff was interesting enough. But I just couldn't cope with Sylvester McCoy and the companion. It really didn't work for me at all. But it's as with most things, a lot of as we see with modern Doctor Who, a lot of it is Marmite. So I think at the time, I was probably one of these even though I was only, I don't know, 17 or 18 at the time, I was the equivalent of one of these grumbling old farts. Now I'll go, modern Doctor Who's rubbish. Yeah. But I was a super hardcore Doctor Who nut. My earliest memory of anything television related is Sarah Jane Smith. Because she was the Doctor's companion when I'm old enough to actually even just remember watching Doctor Who on the TV, probably through my fingers. Because weirdly, I always thought for years that my first memory of television was one of the spiders from the final John Pertwee story on Sarah Jane Smith's back. But actually, when I think about that, I can't have been old enough to actually be able to have watched that. I think probably what my memory is as a toddler is seeing an image from the Radio Times or something like that, a still. And years later, I saw a photograph of still that probably appeared in Radio Times, and it's like that was burned into my memory from being a toddler. So that was the image. My first memories of actually seeing it properly and actually understanding what was going on was probably round about the end of the first season, the Loch Ness Monster, Terror of the Zygons kind of time. And then I have more substantial memories post that, getting a little bit older. So probably the first Doctor Who that I could say I really remember watching and understanding and holding it in my memory, I think, was Robots of Death.
That's a good one.
Which is incredibly vivid, isn't it? All of the production design. I mean, okay, watching it again many, many years later, you think, right, you've got this crew of this big mining ship on this planet where they're mining resources. So all really makes perfect sense. And then they all go onto the bridge and put their "we're on the bridge on our mining ship" uniforms on. And they all look like something from Studio 54 crossed with an Earth, Wind and Fire video, but with 10 times more glitter and weird eye makeup. It's absolutely astonishing. But the designs of the robots, absolutely iconic. So that's how I kind of got into Doctor Who, really. Moving forward over all those years, especially when we got to that point where Doctor Who disappeared off TV, did you ever engage with the Virgin New Adventures?
Oh, I have a story here, because I was too young for the Virgin New Adventures when they were coming out, because I would have been like 10, 11, and they're very much books written for teens and early adults. But somehow a copy of Transit by Ben Aronovich ended up in my primary school, which is very notorious because that's the one. There is a moment in that book where a character is referenced to have the taste of semen in their mouth.
Ooh.
So I don't know how the hell that got into a primary school library without vetting.
How the hell did it get into a Doctor Who book without editorial vetting?
Too, well, the Virgin New Adventures books are, sometimes they're really good, and other times they're trying too hard to be adult and edgy in that kind of very 90s way. I read some when they were coming out, and I've been trying to go back and collect some now, but especially as they're getting ever increasingly harder and increasingly more expensive to find. And I would say for every 2 good Virgin novels, there are probably at least three fairly average ones, and then 2 utterly dire, how did this get out of the slush pile?
I honestly can't remember whether I read any. My mate Rich, he was super into these at the time because I think we were on the dole living in a flat together at the time. I mean, we were on the dole living in a flat at one point, which was when we were deep into our terrible habits, part of which was buying the latest Deep Space Nine VHS tape when it came out, because we didn't, number one, we didn't have Sky, and even if we did have Sky, we'd have to wait for months for it actually to be broadcast on Sky, so we used to buy the tapes as they came out. That was our gyro day. For that period of time. Mine was Wednesday one week and his was Wednesday the following week, so they were perfectly spaced 7 days apart. So every week one of us got a gyro day, and we were almost symbiotic in our spending habits, which was payday was go and get the latest Deep Space Nine video and go to QuickSave and get a load of QuickSave food in, like No Frills potato waffles, No Frills economy burgers, No Frills Swiss rolls, No Frills value cola flavour drink, and No Frills bread. No Frills Swiss roll was 8p, and a 2 litre bottle of No Frills value cola flavour drink from memory was like 14p. So,
I love cola flavoured drink.
Oh, it was wonderful. To be fair, I mean, you look at how people manage to survive on the dole now, it really does amaze you how they actually manage it, because, you know, I think the dole in the UK now is something like £169 a fortnight. I think at the time we were getting about £90 a fortnight, but this is in the probably mid-90s, where it cost 8p for a Swiss roll and 12p for a 2 litre bottle of value cola flavour drink. And because we could pop down a local pub or any one of a number of local pubs and just go over to an old geezer in the corner who would have a plastic bag under his table and say, can I have a couple of pouches of drum, please? Would get 2-ounce pouches of drum tobacco for £2 each as well. Now, at the time, they were about £7 or £8 in the shops. But I went and met Rich for lunch a couple of weeks back over in Malton. And he told me that a 2-ounce pouch of tobacco now is about £24.
Christ.
So no wonder that at the time, when we were on the dole, we could get away with buying a Deep Space Nine video, stocking up on No Frills food, all of which these days would be labelled super unhealthy and ultra-processed. But you do what you're going to do at that time in your life, don't you?
Yep.
No Frills mayonnaise as well. So we would get a little bit battered, because even in those days, we could even afford to pop to the pub the odd time. Or go and get 8 cans of Oranjeboom for £5 and a couple of bottles of Carbon white cider, which I think cost them like £1.20 for 2 litres. And we could get trolleyed watching crap on the television or watching Deep Space Nine videos, and then think, you know what? I really fancy an economy burger, potato waffle, and mayonnaise toasted sandwich. And that was our life.
I know the decades are out. I'm just imagining you dressed like Rich D. Grant and Withnail and I.
Oh,
just walk in the podcast.
We didn't look like that.
I demand to have some booze.
Yeah, we didn't look like that. Although when we did go to our local beer off, and again, this is weird when you think back, but our local beer off.
Did you dress up in your finest?
No, we just kind of staggered down the road in our slobbies, because fortunately, at the top of our street, maybe 100 yards from our dingy flat, we had a corner shop, we had a beer off, we had a chip shop, and we had a Skelton's bakery, which at the time in Hull, Skelton's and McLeish's were the two big bakery chains. There was one of each of those just near the top of our street, and we had a Chinese takeaway just at the top of our street. So really, at that stage in your life, we had everything we needed within very short walking distance of our house. And the beer off we used to go in, at one point, got to the point where, in order to deal with antisocial behaviour and shoplifters, when you walked in the front door, it was basically like a shatterproof plastic tunnel, which you had to walk down, where you could see the shop all around you, but it was like maybe a 4 foot wide, 5 foot wide plastic tunnel that you could just about get 2 people abreast. And then at the end, where the till was, again, was floor to ceiling plastic sheeting with a hatch where they would pass your 8 cans of Oranjeboom, and you would, after you passed your money through. Incredible, really, when you think back. Yeah, amazing.
Everything you've described, I've just wanted to say, in terms of like our last episode, best of British.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But on the other hand, we could live on the dole in a way that you just couldn't today.
No, yeah.
You know? So, swings and roundabouts, isn't it? Swings and roundabouts. Anyway, we better get back to bloody Doctor Who, aren't we? So, my point was that Rich used to read The Virgin New Adventures, and he got quite into it. And I think I tried to read one, which was a Sylvester McCoy one. I didn't really get on with it, so I didn't. But later on, he gave me one by Lance Parkin. And I can't remember whether it was still The Virgin New Adventures, but it was still well before the Christopher Eccleston, Russell T Davies Doctor Who had come back on TV. So I think it was still probably late 90s. Lance Parkin did 2 or 3, and they were the first ones I read that I really enjoyed. There was one called The Infinity Doctors, which I don't have too much memory of. But I think there was one, and I can't remember what it was called, but the setup was that it didn't, the Doctors as a character wasn't really referenced at all in the first part of the book, but it was like an old house somewhere in, I don't know, North Yorkshire or the countryside somewhere, and all snowed in, and the TARDIS had just been at the back of this house covered in snow all winter, but it's actually been there for years and years and years, and the Doctor had just been living there as a normal person for decades.
I think you're talking about Father Time when he adopts
yes.
a young... Is that the one where he adopts a young...
Yeah.
I read that one for the first time a few years back, and that was really good.
Yeah, that's what really kind of gave me a fresh perspective on some of the Who novels and thinking, oh, actually, this could be really good. And there was a long period of time where I thought, if they ever bring Doctor Who back, the BBC should just launch something and really promote it as a prestige drama, and give it all the big promotion and everything else with a good actor and get someone good to write it, but only have the reveal that the TARDIS is in the garden at the end of the 2nd or 3rd episode, and just really build it as a mystery, have it a bit spooky.
Yeah.
Which is really, I suppose, it was never going to happen that way, of course, because they've got to give it the big launch and everything else. But I do wish we kind of, lived in a media environment where you could just slip something out like that, and it gained traction as just a really, really good, spooky, almost Nigel Neal Stone Tapes type of TV drama that just suddenly the penny drops that actually it's Doctor Who, or even that it exists in the same universe as the Doctor. But it's, I really enjoyed that, and that gave me a good idea. So and then I think I read The Last of the Gadarene by Mark Gatiss, which I don't know, I didn't really get on with that either. But yeah, so it kind of led on to the possibility that there could be good Doctor Who fiction out there. But then, of course, New Who came back on the box eventually, didn't it? When it came back on the box, did you continue reading the spin-off novels from the BBC series written for these new Doctors?
I did, but the age range, they were very much written for kids. So the quality, they were fine, but they felt a lot more. I don't want to say throwaway because that feels dismissive a term, but it just felt it just felt like it was just a tie-in, because a lot of these kind of the Virgin and the BBC books with the Eighth Doctor, that was the only regular kind of Doctor Who material you were getting until you got the big finish. You got the comic strip in the Doctor Who magazine. So it really it does feel like this very different, strange sci-fi saga. And then of course, when the show comes back, you can't really be doing that because you want the TV show to be the primary focus. So you then just have to be doing much more throwaway, much more traditional in what the show is going to be now, and just books that any kid can pick up from the library for a couple of quid and read in the course of a week.
Yeah, because I hadn't really followed these novels or what was going on with them. When it was announced that there was going to be a Moorcock Doctor Who novel, it was a pretty much a big surprise, because
it was a shock.
Yeah, because as we've talked about in our recent episodes when we're talking about IP fiction, I had no idea that Moorcock would do something like this, and it's great they did. I mean, it amazes me now really that this was published in 2011. This is 13 years old now, which is kind of baffling just how quickly time goes by. So it was already into the Moffat era. So of course, this is very much firmly a Matt Smith and Amy Pond novel, pre-Rory. So this is first or second series Matt Smith. So where do you sit on the new Doctors and Matt Smith in particular as a doctor for the subject of, not only just as a doctor, but also as someone who you would attempt to capture the voice and character of in a novel?
I'm going to try not to waffle. Out of the modern Doctors, Peter Capaldi was and still is my favorite of the modern Doctor Who's. Before him, it was Matt Smith. I like David Tennant as an actor. I just didn't like where the character of the 10th Doctor really went. And so when Matt Smith came in, his character of the Doctor has much more the energy that I really like in the Doctor. He felt much more eccentric than the 10th Doctor does. The 10th Doctor feels much more kind of generic. He's science hero. Whereas the 11th Doctor is all kind of weird. He dresses funny. And I feel the problem with Matt Smith's performance, it's really hard to capture in prose because there's so much just kind of going on there.
Yeah.
It's like with some of the when they try and do Patrick Troughton in novel form, it doesn't really work because some of it is really down of that character to just how Patrick Troughton is playing the character, both just facially and physically. And I think with like a lot of the, like when he comes back later on in the show, they always kind of go for like the Charlie Chaplin tramp in space parts of the character and not just how much of like a steel trap mind the second Doctor has, in which he's 3 steps ahead of everything going on around him, but he's playing it like he's 4 steps behind everyone just so he can see what's going on. Yeah.
That's one of the, I think the Doctor is always plays best when he seems like he's doing things from a sense or from a position of detachment. In that, I always enjoy that there should always be a sense of awkwardness to the Doctor in his dealings with people. There should always be but there should always also be a sense that he is 3 or 4 steps ahead of the game because he is just so outlandishly alien in the way that he thinks. So one of the problems I think I've had with the new series since it came back was, and we'll probably touch on some of this as we talk about the book and, maybe into a second episode, is that I think one of the weaknesses of New Who is how contrived and how much artifice there is to the Doctor being otherworldly. That doesn't really feel earned or genuine or authentic.
I definitely have to agree with that. I think that's one of the reasons why Capaldi ranks higher is because I feel that he definitely gets into the strange kind of ancient alien that the Doctor is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the reasons why I like it when when the Peter Capaldi Doctor gets the guitar, because it just makes him feel like this aged old rock star who's just bumming his way through time and space.
I really like Capaldi as the Doctor, and I think he is, with caveats, the best of the new Doctors, but I think he was poorly served by the writing. And sadly, I think that's the case with a lot of them. I don't have a problem with Jodie Whittaker as the actor or the Doctor, but I think she was poorly served by the writing.
I think with Jodie Whittaker is that they're going very much for kind of the Tennant style kind of goofy exuberance.
Yeah.
Because when Whittaker plays just dark or pissed off, she sells it in a way I'm like, I want to see more of how she's playing it in this moment. But I always get the feeling that with Jodie, the writers felt that because they had the first female Doctor, they had to play it a lot safer. And I kind of feel that was the problem from the get-go.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem I had was every time she walked in a room, she was gurning and or panting. And the first thing she did when she walked in a room was wave the sonic screwdriver around and look at it like she was reading a readout. So rather than getting a sense that she could walk into a room and evaluate whatever was going on, evaluate the environment, look at an object and figure out its purpose, everything was scan it with a screwdriver, read it. It just didn't work for me at all, and I think it's a real shame.
It's one of the things I love with the John Pertwee Doctor, who is my favorite of the classic era, is that at every point, whenever he walks into a room, you know he's silently thinking, "I am the smartest person in the room. I am gonna do my shit in the best velvet money can buy."
And I've got you all weighed up. From the moment I walk in a room, I don't care how authoritarian or authorial, how much authority you've got as a character. All of the scenes that he has with ministers are always priceless. Always.
John Pertwee can verbally demean anyone around him effortlessly. He is the only actor I can think of who can make the word quisling spat with such vehemence that it feels like he's just called you a bastard.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I liked Matt Smith as a Doctor, I think, even though I think Capaldi was probably on balance the best of the new Doctors. And we'll get to Ncuti Gatwa, who I like. But the reason why I liked Matt Smith is because of all the lovey-dovey shit in the David Tennant era. And I'm very much of the opinion that it's not that I don't want romance between the Doctor and a companion because I'm like, romance, girls. It's not that. It's just that I always like the idea that the Doctor is so aloof and his main interest in humans, most of it is almost anthropological interest, as much as anything. And there's a real nice suggestion in this book, actually, that he has a lot in common with the Terraphiles of the name of the book, because basically he's an Earth nerd. But, he just likes the trappings. And Amy actually challenges him on this and says, you're just like you're like one of these alien cosplayers, aren't you? You just really like it, just like someone would go to a cosplay convention because they really like Battlestar Galactica. I really enjoy that. So when Matt Smith kicks off and Amy Pond comes onto him, he's like, ugh! And he's like, he doesn't know what to do, and he don't want any part of it, because to him it would be like shagging the dog.
It's just weird. Like, I think my favorite, like, I like David Tennant when he's with Catherine Tate, because they just have that kind of, we're best friends, we're just gonna make fun of each other relentlessly, but we clearly love each other. In the same way, like, I think, like, with the Fourth Doctor and Sarah, in which they're just two best friends who are just getting into, like, the most insanely dangerous scrapes every day and just getting away with it.
And you know what? If when they were wandering around the inside of the TARDIS, if they were fucking, whatever. Whatever. Tom Baker, in many ways, was the biggest curse for Doctor Who as a series. Because from that point onwards, prior to that, you had character actors with really unique identities. William Hartnell was a well-known character actor in films. People recognised him and knew him. He'd been in numerous war movies, and he was in Brighton Rock. He was, even in Brighton Rock, he was playing a guy much older than he actually was, but William Hartnell seemed to be one of those Sid James type characters who always looked 50 plus, probably even when he was 18.
Yeah.
Patrick Troughton, again, well-known character actor who was recognisable, but again brought that kind of steely intelligence to it all, as well as being a little bit unusual and flippant and slightly off-ball. And, he always gets like the Charlie Chaplin-esque cosmic hobo description, but I think that's more from people who just look at him and his haircut and his dress. And then John Pertwee with his crushed velvet jackets. But of course, when you think about the time when those characters were on screen, their costumes did look sort of archaic to a degree, but they could have all walked down Carnaby Street in London. Not just Carnaby Street, they could have all basically walked down any street in London and not really attracted a second glance. And Tom Baker was the same. His sense of style, his sense of dress was very particular to the character, but it didn't stick out like a sore thumb. Post Tom Baker, although there was that final season where they put fucking question marks on his collars, which was, I think, John Nathan Turner's input.
Question marks everywhere.
Yeah. Post that, you got to a point where they had to try so hard to make the Doctor quirky and outlandish that's when you get this sense of artifice and it doesn't feel authentic or genuine anymore. I think they managed to get rid of that when Eccleston came in. Eccleston had a certain dress sense and style which worked for that Doctor. I think Tennant walked a slight line, but it wasn't that long before you actually saw people walking down the street dressed like David Tennant. And actually, that now, an old pinstripe suit with a pair of sand shoes or Converse and a Mac became really fashionable.
Yeah.
So people were dressing like that. And Matt Smith, again, okay, he had the bow tie, but again, you could kind of get away with dressing like that. So they all had an identity and a style. They didn't look like clowns.
No.
I think the drop to bollock, I think, with Jodie Whittaker when they put her in that outfit, because if someone walked down the street in that, people probably would raise an eyebrow and say, well, that's certainly a style choice. And also the fact that she wore it like a costume and she didn't have a style or a dress sense. So I think things were stacked against Jodie quite unfairly, really. She had too many companions. So, all of the drama and arcs just got a little bit bogged down and a little bit messy and a little bit lost. And then, of course, we got the arc with the Timeless Child, where we found out that the Doctor isn't actually a Time Lord at all. Let's see where it goes, I suppose. It just felt a little bit desperate.
It is what it is. Like, if you're one of those people who's like really in depth with like the lore they put up in the novels, it's like, the Doctor had faces before Hartnell. It's one of those things that would take it or leave it. I like bits of it. At the same time, I like that they've brought elements of it going forward into the new era within Ncuti Gatwa.
Yeah, well, the worst thing they could possibly have done was to say that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. I think a lot of people just kind of wanted that to happen, like it's a bad comic book retcon. Yeah. But no, I like how some elements of that have kind of come forward in the current Doctor, because I don't want to say it gives it a mystery again, because the secret of the Doctor's mystery only goes as far as, depending how far into the show you watch. It just gives him a little bit of uniqueness. It gives him a loneliness that the last of the Time Lords stuff got very bogged down with and tedious with in the first era of Modern Who.
Yeah, at some point I did have a mental note to actually talk about how things went with the Time Lords in the 70s. Because, of course, Moorcock is writing here a Doctor Who novel, but in the late 60s and early 70s, he's written stories that actually hew quite close to some of the material and some of the themes within the idea of the Doctor as a character, being from, almost a race outside of time with certain powers. But I think we'll get to that as we 56 minutes in. Eventually. We actually maybe talk about the coming of the Terror Files. Fuck it. We always do digressions on this, so we've done some digressions. By the way, we were going to talk about what curious drinking options would manage to rustle up for the purposes of talking about Michael Moorcock's The Coming of the Terror Files. So what have you got?
Well, I was hoping to find some really tacky American beer, which is splashed with English, British iconography, because I feel it would go really well with Coming of the Terror Files. After 20 minutes walking up and down the aisles of my local supermarket's Offie, ironically talking to a friend arguing about protons, I found a beer called Infinity Hero. Oh. It's an India Pale Ale, next-gen hops, juicy citrus character, and it has a guy with a weird...
Oh, it's got a hop head.
Had a hop head. Kind of doing like Doctor Strange. Oh, he has an infinity symbol on his belt buckle. That would be quite nice.
So that's like Hop Command turned superhero.
Yep. And it's 7% alcohol by volume. And what did you get?
Well, I've not managed to get to the shops, so I just had to kind of look around me and think, right, I'm reading this book. What's going on? We've got Judoon playing cricket. We've got weird semi-English aristocrats in the far future with a strange idea of what English aristocracy in history was, and kind of a messed up version of the past, feeding almost like weird future cosplayers their image of what the past really was, particularly the English 20th century. So I've gone for gin and tonic because I had
Nice.
some Daffy's Mulberry Gin kicking around that I had to finish. So quite a nice label.
I
Yeah.
I was hoping I could find a bottle of Bombardier
Ah.
or something like that, but unfortunately not. And everything you described just makes me think, oh, so you tried to find the official beer of the Tory party.
Yeah.
Because speaking of people cosplaying as aristocrats of a fabled past, and it is an election year.
Yeah, but they're all fucking weirdos and snobs. I think Lee Anderson probably drinks Bombardier. I'm not sure any of the. I'm not sure your Reese Moggs and your Gervs. Well, Gerv will be too coked up. He probably doesn't drink beer at all.
No,
You know, but and Sunak certainly won't. But I decided because I only had a pint glass, I would just finish it all off and have a pint of gin and tonic. But I've already got through most of it. So to follow that up, I'm going to have Hatherwood Porter, dark, sleek, and malted. So once again, I'm sticking with something that I could probably drink before I head out to the wicket and get some leather on Willow.
knock a few rounds of what's
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. So let's get on to this bloody book. Finally, now we've got some libations to guide us through. So I've got the paperback here, which is quite nice. It's got a nice keyhole cover as well, which you don't see very often these days. A nice keyhole cover on the paperback there, which is quite pleasant. The annoying thing is I had to buy this again. I've already got 2 copies of it, and I can't find either of them because Phil got me a signed copy for my birthday or Christmas years ago, but that's probably at the bottom of a pile somewhere. But that's all right. This will get sent out to a patron once we're finished with it, when we've done part 2, no doubt. But what do we kick off with? So we get an introduction. Now, obviously, when you're thinking Moorcock's going to write a Doctor Who novel, and you read the write-up, and there's a write-up from Neil Gaiman on the back, like a pull quote from a review. It says, "Magical and unexpected. It's Doctor Who written by the most important living British fantasist, and it's as good as I'd hoped, and much funnier." Well, interesting. And Stephen Baxter said, "Delicious. The modern genre's most original voice has invited the Doctor into his multiverse for an adventure sparkling with wit and peril. Authentic Moorcock, authentic Who, an essential read." So, of course, some of the things that I'd learned about this book before I read it was that actually it's as much a Michael Moorcock multiverse book as it is a Doctor Who book. And it is totally a hybrid.
I have to admit that when I first read this book way back when it came out, I was really excited for it. I admit, initially, first read through, I was disappointed because I was hoping for something more equivalent to his 60s sci-fi stuff. So like Fire Clown, The Black Corridor, The Sundered Worlds. And this is much closer to his Dances at the End of Time books, or or very much, because it's very much name checked throughout the book, the second Ether space opera madness of the second Ether books, the multiverse comic he did in the 90s for DC, and a lot of his later SF. So first time round, I want to put it in a really good Doctor Who term, I went in hoping for Terminus, and I got Enlightenment instead.
Oh my god! Well, fortunately for us, there's no Taylor in it, is there? So, we dodged a bullet there.
I don't know. Lord Bingo of Sherwood could be played by a little ginger traitor in a schoolboy uniform.
Yeah, well, if they ever make a movie, see if Mark Strickland still looks relatively youthful. He probably doesn't, because he's probably in his late 50s now, I would have thought. Maybe older.
I think he seems relatively youthful. He was the documentarian who discovered Steve Irwin.
Oh, interesting.
He went into making nature documentaries, and he discovered this Aussie maniac and started making the first documentaries about him.
Oh, good for him. Nice to know that he flourished after moving on from acting. Well, that's good. Yeah, we are getting immediate reference-a-thon to various other things. But there's not just second Ether in this, because, again, for listeners who aren't aware, Moorcock wrote a series probably starting in, was it the late 80s or the early 90s, with a book called Blood?
I think it's...
Followed up with War Amongst the Angels. No, sorry, Fabulous Harbours, and then War Amongst the Angels. and he introduces the concept of the Chaos Engineers and the Second Ether and the Grey Fees, and it's like an alternate idea of how the universe is built and how the multiverse works. I remember reading Blood for the first time, and we'll get to that at some point on this podcast. I remember reading Blood for the first time and thinking, what the fuck is going on?
Yep, that's...
Because the book leaps
that
from
was my first...
a story about an inverted society in North America where I think white people are slaves, and that's where the concept of the gambling, jugaderos, and the Terminal Cafe, all these things which are quite, recognizable Moorcock references, all originated in that. That spun off into Fabulous Harbours, which is really a book of connected short stories, and The War Amongst the Angels, which is definitely my favourite of that trilogy, which I think is absolutely terrific book. But that all of the concepts that arose in those books span off, and the last Elric trilogy, the Moonbeam Roads trilogy, pulls a lot of that stuff in, and there's a lot of crossover and a lot of different things going on. So yeah, there are definitely elements of that in this, but I think what there's a lot more of is P.G. Wodehouse.
Oh yeah,
it is P.G. Wodehouse to the max, even to the point where Lord Bingo of Sherwood, whose real name is Lord Robin of Sherwood of the Earl of Locksley, because of course what we find out is that in this far future, these people who consider themselves terraphiles, or are sometimes referred to as the toxophilic terraphiles, or the gentleman's club, or any of a whole host of different things, take personality pills which allow them to live out. It's like an advanced version of cosplaying. So imagine if we were keen cosplayers, but actually, rather than Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek or Doctor Who or Space 1999, what we were really obsessed with was the cricketing period of W.G. Grace or Robin Hood or any whole host of different things. We could take a personality pill and live out that persona to a degree, but the personas that they live out are the far future sort of mistaken ideas of what these past images and people came from, which is all largely based upon things that are found in books in the Arctic ruins of Skipton after a comet devastated the Earth. And that these obsessions that they have, this is when Amy kind of compares the Doctor to them, saying, these have got the same obsession with Earth as you have. You're basically you're cosplaying being a human being from Earth. It was quite good fun. I liked it. And of course, Skipton's half hour up the road from here, so I can feel the locus. I'm enjoying it. But in our first chapter, well, actually, it's an introduction. Our very first reference, straight away, we've got Captain Cornelius. So yep. Captain Cornelius is essentially a space pirate. I'm just going to have a little find out about who this Captain Cornelius is. I'll just do a little read. It says, in his long Epiconion, Cornelius, nicknamed the Dutchman, wrote, catching the solar winds, the vessel breaks and turns. Upon the brain and all the multiverse is hers. The yearning void calls out, gloriously perverse. She spurns a dozen planetary advances. This latticed orb of silver, gold, and glowing pearl sustains all reverses, and her purse remains, both threatening prize and perilous temptation, yet still my patronage and brain are hers. There can be no occasion, no threat or lure, to drive me from my chosen station. His ship is called Pain. His hand light on his great wheel, he stands at a bridge proud and insouciant, glorying in the beauty he commands. She is the most peerlessly perfect light-powered vessel in all space-time. Her sails strain against the pressure of countless billion winking photons. Her holds are already crowded with the invaluable and exotic booty of 100 beautiful worlds. Within her mysterious envelope of atmosphere created from stolen technologies, her multifarious crew, flesh, metal, and petal, drawn from almost all the sentient creatures of the galaxy, crowd her decks to look down on a world they have come to consider their own. Ironface is their name for the man who wears a Piero mask of brazen metal in the style of the ancient Italian comedy. Cornelius the pirate, ruthless poet, courteous thief, commander of a vessel feared and familiar, envied as much for her ethereal loveliness as for the accuracy of her destructive arsenal, motions with his hand, giving the order for his men's descent. Only remembered Lombardy, under her buccaneer captain Hong Hunter, could hope to challenge Pain in open space. It is with relief that Venetians, training their radio optics upon her as she appears in their upper stratosphere, understand how firmly a captain honours the conventions of his trade. He comes to take her tribute fair and square, according to the article signed by all the Brotherhood save the rogue Cervantes. Cervantes claims to own the one thing Cornelius covets, but neither pirate will describe it or admit they know what it is. Captain Cornelius remains as mysterious a figure to his men as to his mistresses. His posted verse, studied so they might know him better, only serves to add to his mystique. It says little of his character, save that he favours beauty over sentiment. A lonely figure, he stands chewing a stick of oily black taupe, offers his commands with quiet economy. He dines alone or with his boatswain, Peter Vive, a woman almost as distant from the crew as himself, and as respected. None can say they like their captain or his boatswain, but they obey both with a confidence they offer no other commanders, and their loyalty is well rewarded. When the Pain completes their long tour of violent adventure, every member of her crew will be worth a fortune great enough to buy presidents and kings. But Cornelius, they are sure, will not have found what or whom he seeks. Most say it's a woman, maybe his vanished wife. Some say it's an artifact, once the plaything of a god. Cornelius gives the order. The ebony boats break free from their mothership and sail down through blazing, sun-tinged clouds to Venice's morning with all their sad, commanding dignity. The pirates, drawn from 100 worlds and a dozen space-time continua, have come at last. Only a few, watching from their decks and towpath, refuse to acknowledge their power. Some even drop to their knees, bowing in respect to the inevitable, as peasants paying homage to a feudal lord. I really like that setup. I think it's a fantastic start. Notwithstanding the fact that it's Captain Cornelius, it's a great image. This pirate captain with the Harlequin iron mask. It's good stuff. And there are a few references in there. I mean, funnily enough, it refers to the Dutch Captain Cornelius. Now, I remember years and years and years ago when I was writing for a magazine or about films. So this is going back quite a while. There was a Paul Verhoeven film almost made of a book called Batavia's Graveyard. This is the first time I ever twigged this, but Batavia's Graveyard was the truish tale of the shipwreck of the flagship of the Dutch East India Company and one of the bloodiest mutinies in history in 1692, when Geronimus Cornelius was responsible for the murder of over 100 shipwreck survivors. Yeah, there you go. Moorcock has always been about his obscure references, hasn't he?
Yep.
And that's quite a nice one. I think it's also a real missed opportunity that Paul Verhoeven did not make the film of Batavia's Graveyard, because that sounds right up his street. That sounds amazing.
Insane.
Yeah. So, Captain Cornelius, and we find by the end of that introduction, he's coming to our galaxy to find the only being he considers his peer, the Doctor. Ooh. Although we don't know why at this point.
No, it's just like, like you said, there's very in-depth references, and the ship name Remembered Lombardi. I was wondering, is that named after Vince Lombardi, the famous manager of the Green Bay Packers of the Wisconsin football team? And I'm not sure. And as a Wisconsinite, part of me is like, please God. So.
One thing you're absolutely assured of reading this book is you would need a Jess Nevins companion's guide.
Yeah, it is references on top of references. I know I sent you this screenshot from chapter 3. You've got a fair bit of power and experience between you then. You don't do those literary worlds, I suppose. The free-ranging ones where you get to play a serious part in Balzac or Disney or Austen or Meredith or James or Lansdale or Mieville or Pynchon or Mann or Sinclair or Calderon or Gygax or Moore. And I don't know if he's meaning China Mieville or Herman Mieville, who wrote Moby Dick.
Isn't that Herman Melville?
Oh yeah, you're right. You might be right.
I think it's definitely referencing China Mieville.
I've definitely been on a Mieville kick. After reading this, I read The City in the City last week, and I'm trying to make my way through Perdido Street Station. That is a dense read.
I gave up a third of the way through Perdido Street Station. Loz recommended it to me, and I could feel myself growing old as I read it. And I'm not naturally opposed to long books. I know that I do tend to read short, snappy. Certainly, the stuff that we talk about on this podcast tends to be short, snappy, punchy, often rubbish.
200 pages and some blood and a blood-stained rat on the cover.
Absolutely. But Perdita Street Station really tested me. And I can applaud his ability to create worlds and atmosphere and characters, but for me, it just goes. I need it to go somewhere.
Sometimes you've got to
within a reasonable pace.
Sometimes you just got to be in the right mood for sometimes. Like you could pick up a book and you try and read it, and you're like, I can't make hide nor hair of this. And you put it down, and then 6 months later, you pick it up, and you're like,
yes,
drink it.
That is true. I've done that a couple of times. Funnily enough, I did that probably with 7 or 8 years between attempts. I did that with the Silmarillion, and the Silmarillion isn't a long book.
I think the Silmarillion is my longest running unfinished book. I've been trying to read it since like 1990. I did exactly the same thing, and one day I picked it up and I started reading it. I might have been on holiday. I might have got it from a charity shop or a second-hand bookshop. I do this a lot when we're on holiday. Because when you're at home, you have passages of time where you have time to read that's sort of compressed amongst all the other shit that's going on. Is that I think I need some quicker satisfaction, and I need quicker gratification when I'm reading sometimes. But when I go on holiday, I'll find a book, and because you relax and you've got more time to read, and there's, it's not like you've got to do X or Y by X o'clock. All of a sudden, my entire approach to reading a book changes. So it could have been that, but also a friend of mine, Gemma, she recommended a book to me when I first met her when we worked together called Blood in the Mist by Hope Maylees. And we will cover it at some point. I want Gemma to come on the podcast to talk about this book, because I tried to read that twice over a couple of years, and each time I never got more than 3 chapters in before I put it down and never picked it up again. But then I found a copy of it, I think the Fantasy Masterworks edition of it, which is just behind me on the shelf here, probably somewhere. But I started reading it on holiday. I just read it cover to cover over the course of an afternoon, and it was terrific. So yeah, maybe. But Perdita Street Station is it looks like a fucking Peter F. Hamilton book. It's why I sometimes miss the long flight from England to America, or from America to England, because then I'd be like, okay, I have to pack one book, and that's my only entertainment for the entire. I think I read the 5th Dune book just by forcing myself to be on a plane, and one time that was how I read Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard. Although I think part of me died on that flight. There was a point when I was just editing the book with a pen angrily while stuck on this 11-hour flight international.
Confession time. I fucking loved Battlefield Earth when I read it in my 20s. What I wasn't prepared for was how fucking stupid and funny it was. And not only that, but how intentionally funny it was. L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, all that stuff aside, you get all these ideas. Oh, this is a guy who created a religion based upon weird space aliens and Zetans and Thetans or whatever and everything else. So you kind of expect Battlefield Earth to contain some of this stuff.
An Atlas Shrugged style polemic praising
Yes,
Dianetics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But instead, what you get is a massively bloated and flabby nonsense pulp science fiction novel.
I will say, have you ever read Fear? Or I think it's either Final Blackout or Last Blackout, which were 2 pulp novels he wrote before he got into making his own religion. And they're legitimately really good and really short books. Like, L. Ron Hubbard despised the man, but at the same time, God, he could actually write a fairly decent pulp horror story or pulp SF story.
I remember when Invasion Earth, the tetralogy, the Invasion Earth tetralogy, Mission Earth.
I think it's Mission Earth. Invasion Earth was that terrible British X-Files knockoff in the 60s, which I think only myself and maybe 5 other people
That was the
watched.
Jed Mercurio series, was it? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so myself and 6 other people.
I watched that. I quite enjoyed it to a degree, but it didn't stick the landing again. I liked the build-up. But yeah, Mission Earth. Yeah, the Mission Earth tetralogy that you used to get full-page ads for in Sunday supplements and magazines and newspapers. But he must have Scientology Foundation must have spent a fortune trying to flog these Mission Earth books. And there was a budget bookshop in Hull in the 90s and maybe in the late 80s, and it had them all in. So I ended up getting like 3 for a $5 or whatever it was, like you get in budget bookshops these days. And I think I got 2 or 3 of them, and I think I read half the first one. It was absolute garbage. But again, it wasn't like any kind of crazy polemic. It was just like a pulp
and
nonsense.
And how many budget brand burgers could that have got you?
Well, this is the thing. That could have kept me in Swiss rolls for about 7 months, I think. Yeah, but you make these decisions, don't you? But yeah, Battlefield Earth, I love it. And I mean, I must say, I've only read it once, and it was 30 odd years ago, so it might not stand up to close scrutiny anymore. But at the time, I thought it was really funny.
I've always been tempted to reread it because sometimes it's hard to separate the art from the artist. And something like, okay, I remember this as being clearly in need of editing or a chainsaw, because there's like the first 500 pages are fine. Then you get the second 500 pages, which is just a lot of bickering over the bad guys in the first 500 pages and all their outstanding debts.
That's what I found so hilarious. And when the film came out, it was like everyone's like, "This is pathetically terrible. It's laughably bad. It's so bad. It's funny, but for all the wrong reasons."
Yeah.
But actually, what the film is terrible. But what the film got absolutely right was the material it was adapting. It's fucking stupid, and the film took it. I mean, when you've got scenes like when you've got John Travolta and Forrest Whitaker in their cyclo makeup in the bar, having their back and forth, where Forrest Whitaker wants to try and betray John Travolta because they're all basically pathetic, like pathetic movers and shakers, but they're all really bad at it, and everybody wants to betray each other to try and make profit. It's straight out the book, and they are complete morons.
It's pulp sci-fi to a T. Can you train people with caveman level technology to fly F-16 jets that somehow still work after 1,000 years? Yes, because that's the kind of sci-fi, that's the kind of science fiction which, for better or worse, it's going for. It's the same kind of stuff they're putting out in the 30s.
Yeah, the Battlefield Earth movie for me is a guilty watch every couple of years, and I thoroughly enjoy it every time. And it's something me and my dad bond over. It's just how stupid and ridiculous and funny it is. And, and the thing is that the film, I'm sure they thought, this is going to be great. We'll do the first half of the book, and then it'll be ace because we'll do the second half when we make the money back. And of course, it just tanked and made about 30 bob and a pickled egg.
I think that's the same.
But you didn't even get to the point where, after they destroy the Cyclo homeworld at the end of the movie, the next stage in the book is all of the other races of the galaxy all descend onto Earth into orbit, and they're all just as big fucking idiots as the Cyclos are.
That's the same relationship
it's amazing.
that my stepdad and I have over the Disney's John Carter film. And that it's a guilty pleasure, but it's honestly like, I think it just got poorly maligned because it was advertised terribly, but it's a fun pulpy swashbuckler.
Yeah. The mistake the filmmakers of that made, and I say mistake in inverted commas, is that they adapted the book so faithfully. Because everything in that book has been done to death in the 100 years, or however many years it is, since that book was published. It's all been ripped off, it's all been redone and recycled over and over and over again. So if you do a faithful version of that story, of course everybody's going to go, this is derivative. Yeah. I really like that movie. And because Princess of Mars is one of the books I got off Pops, and I remember bonding with Pops talking about the John Carter books as in my early teens, I have really fond memories of those conversations. So when that film came out, I was actually quite emotional because I thought if Pops had been there to watch it with me, he would have really fucking dug it. He would have really enjoyed it. And that film I actually had a really strong emotional reaction to. Even though there are things about it that I think were perhaps done quite right, I just had a really powerful emotion reaction to that film, and I really, really enjoyed it from start to finish.
It's honestly a very underrated film.
Yeah, I like that. But yeah, it was completely butchered by their own marketing campaign, wasn't it? Because some studio executive said, well, that Eddie Murphy film set on Mars tanked, and we just released Mars Needs Moms, and that tanked. So we need to avoid having Mars in the title because it'll also tank. Because films with Mars in the title, like Mission to Mars, have all tanked.
Or Ghosts of John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars.
Oh, Ghosts of Mars.
Film I've never
guilty pleasure.
I've never seen it. I've always felt like,
you know what? It's terrible.
It's terrible. Is it good?
I really like it.
Okay. Is it as bad as Prince of Darkness? Well, okay, Prince of Darkness is a guilty pleasure for me.
I really like Prince of Darkness.
That's a fun. That's John Carpenter doing like 70s Doctor Who right there.
It is, and it's no accident that he gave himself a screenwriting credit in that, Martin Quatermass. So that the screenwriting is attributed to Martin Quatermass. Yeah, because of course he was a huge Nigel Neal and Quatermass fan.
Didn't Neal write the original screenplay for Halloween 3, the not Michael Myers Halloween film?
He did. But he was particularly upset about what they did with it. But I think there's still a lot of Nigel Neal left in the finished product. Yeah. But he Nigel Neal only got that opportunity because John Carpenter was a huge fan of this, So, yeah. Anyway. Well, back to this bloody book. Anyway. God. We're definitely going to have to do a part 2.
Part 2. We actually talk about the book.
Part 2, the book. Yeah. But we do get, after that introduction, we don't hear from Captain Cornelius again until the intermission, because what we found is that this book is very, very much a traditional Michael Moorcock 3-book structure. The first book is essentially a big PG Woodhouse farce. The second book, where they actually get into space, which is punctuated with another intermission where we found out a little bit more about Captain Cornelius. It'll be a while before we come back to it. But we get our introduction to the Doctor and Amy, who are in the TARDIS. But actually, they're not in the TARDIS. We have a flashback to the TARDIS. But they're on a sort of holiday. So what do we have for our intro to the Doctor and Amy, Miles, other than Jadoon playing cricket? So this is where they're sitting with lots of people in, strange variations on early 20th century British cricket garb and various other bits and pieces. They're all playing a version of cricket called Whack It. And the Doctor and Amy are there. The Doctor is quite happily engaging in all of this stuff. But we get a little flashback to when Amy's having a think about how they've actually got there, because it says, and Ahmad Jadoon ambled down the pavilion steps and onto the pitch, swinging his whacket and acknowledging the odd bit of polite clapping from the spectators, while, heading to the other end, trotted a 6-limbed dogman from Chardonnay, a bow in his forepaw, a quiver of tournament arrows on his back. Amy had to admit she was finding it hard to get used to all the races of the galaxy taking part in this essentially British game. She was rather glad the Doctor had proven to have enough pull to bring her on tour with him. She'd fallen in love with this bizarre mishmash of misunderstood, mostly early 20th century English culture. Had they only been doing this for a few days? Was it less than a week ago she had woken up on board the TARDIS by the sound of loud static? A crackling voice had been speaking a tongue she could not get her head around, but which the Doctor, or someone sounding like the Doctor, was answering using the same language. Erdle, durdle, daroo, comic, snap, crackle and pop, hiss, wow and flutter, shriek, scream and twitter. Zekunafia, harrow after me, sagging lorries. I am a... It wasn't a fun mixture of noises to unglue your eyes to. By the time she joined the Doctor at the TARDIS console, Amy had swigged some coffee and munched some muesli and was better equipped to face the barrage of sight and sound which had his attention. He signed for her to help. He was speaking English again, or at least something similar to English, playing his nouveau retro control boards and typewriters and clapometers like a Wurlitzer organ, desperately trying to keep the images and voices coming, but he was losing them rapidly. He ripped off his jacket and threw it to the floor. He rolled up his sleeves while she held the coordinates steady. No! The breakup finally came with a horrible shriek, which sounded to her as if it had issued from a metallic throat. Hey, Daru! Cried the Doctor, both hands struggling to hold down a big plunger. Don't fade on me now, Doric, Valley, Rum, Ginnan, Tom Mix. You're still not coming through properly. Was that something about the colour pools? The chilling shriek sounded again, and then slowly faded. No, 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 no. He glanced over to where she was standing. I'll swear they said Tom Mix. He was a silent movie film star. You know him? Never heard of him. We know where they are. Now we need to know who. Grimly, he tried to re-establish contact for a while until in the end she brought him a cup of tea and some Pop-Tarts. Despite his protests, she made him sit down. Surely there's what tears in his eyes. From what she could tell, he was worried about some bad guys called General Frank, Stroke, Freddy Force, and his antimatter men, who had ventured over to our side of a super-dense black hole in Sagittarius. They had been there in the far, far future for some time, apparently, and their malign influence was spreading upwards to the here and now. Up to their old-fashioned dirty work, the Doctor said, those antimatter men, dipping in and out of the second ether, and my guess is they're probably not the only ones. He chewed thoughtfully on his Pop-Tart. Someone's messing with the normal rules of energy flow. Time and space are all over the place, quite literally, I mean, growing increasingly unstable. The Doctor leaped to his feet before Amy could tell him he was talking what to her was nonsense. I suspect, he went on, stabbing an accusing finger at her, that the General's old girlfriend, Peggy Steele, the invisible Lady Steele, is with them too. A pretty unsavoury gang, and Quelch is up to something, no doubt. You never know what side he'll take. This isn't looking good for us, no matter how you look at it. So, already, we've got multiple references. Yep. Tom Mix, yes, silent cowboy movie star who Moorcock was very keen on, even wrote an appreciation of Tom Mix in his book Tales from the Texas Woods.
Ah, okay.
We've got a reference to Quelch, a frequent presence in the second ether titles by Moorcock. So again, we've got our titles, but with all this stuff about, Judoon playing cricket and some of the characters that we'll, find out a little bit more about in the second chapter, it's playful, it's quite whimsical. There's that lovely character bit where she teases the Doctor about his membership of an alien fan club of cosplayers who really are into 20th century British culture and trappings, based on those books found in the Arctic ruins of Skipton. It's good fun. I like it. But we also meet Mr. and Mrs. Banning Cannon, who will be important characters. And on that note, we're out of time. And we're going to have to actually do this book in part 2. We've set it up.
Yeah.
But, at the... sadly, we're missing an effective clinger. Fucking hell, I can't even speak. That pint of gin and tonic has damaged my tonsils. So, we're going to have to end on a cliffhanger. So tune in next time when Miles and I will actually cover the book.
Oh,
cheers, Miles. We shall hook up again at some point further along the line, somewhere in the second ether.
I'll make sure to bring my my best What's-It clothes.
All right, cool. Catch you next time.
Well, the book itself is called The Coming of the Terraphiles, and with part 1, the Terraphiles haven't even arrived yet. So,
yeah,
join us for part 2, The Coming of the Terraphiles.
Yeah, when the Terraphiles will finally come. Massive thanks to Miles, and we didn't get too far into the coming of the Terraphiles, but with 61 years of Doctor Who to yak about, it was probably always going to go down this way, and we barely scratched the surface of any of that. We'll be back with part 2 soon, when we'll actually get into the time weeds, but in the meantime, check out the Casual Trek podcast. You can find it on all good podcatchers. In comments news, over on YouTube, listener R3Del662, I'll just stick to Ardell, said of our last episode on Blake 7, I was really excited for this episode. I love Blake 7. My excitement also kind of reminded me that I'm probably a really weird demographic for this podcast, because I grew up on a lot of the media that's discussed here, but I'm from rural Ireland and in my mid-20s. Most of this stuff was what my mother grew up on, and rural Ireland being rural Ireland, we had no TV or internet for most of my childhood, so all the shows I watched and books I read were old things my parents remembered from their past. 13-year-old me definitely had a bit of a crush on Elric. Aside from that, which was mostly a sentiment I wanted to express somewhere, my actual favourite factoid about Blake 7 was that at some point they were filming a scene in a quarry and they kept hearing this high-pitched noise that was interfering with the filming. So they went to look for the source of the noise and found Doctor Who filming in the same quarry. Also, Servalan is absolutely amazing. That's lovely. Thanks for sharing that, Ardell. And you're right about Servalan. And that's also a great reminder that for people of our generation, we absorbed our formative telly without the contamination of the internet and social media and the various rage bait and other guff floating around in our spaces. All we had was the playground at school to share our experiences and hot takes, as the kids would say. Which is, I suppose, what this podcast allows me to do now, in my 50s. My sister, our Jane, also commented with a reminder. Do you remember the letter we three penned to Barry Tuck's points of view? We voiced our absolute devastation at how it ended. I was 12, and I had a major crush on Tarrant. We watched Tuck for weeks after, but it never got read out. Fuck you, Barry Tuck. Fuck you. And A Literal Horse 5023 said, I've got a book suggestion, Slugs, by Sean Hudson. It's exactly what you expect. Well, thank you for that suggestion, your hoarseness. As it happens, we've had that on our Halloween poll for the last couple of years, but it's never been picked. So, Graham and I have decided to just do it anyway as part of our Halloween bumper month. Should land round about October. And that reminds me, I haven't come up with a list of this year's Halloween poll, so I must work on that. Any more suggestions out there? Send them my way. Thanks for these comments, folks. We love to see them. And thanks, as always, to our patrons for keeping this show on the road. First, those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And our chaos engineers, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Nelbert, Ophir Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, and Simon Perrins. And of course, thanks to our crafty Jugaderos, Alexander Harris, Christian Hundal, Eliel Westenra, Liam Toner, Laws, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Graham Holden, Toby White, and eternal thanks to our patron demons, Alistair Davison, Andy Clark, Andy Darby, Dave Lee, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Imria, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Joe Monty, Lee Gary, Mark Hebden, Marius Latauskas, Miles Riedel-Bateau, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Milazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but never least, Robert McMillan. I know you're on catch-up, Robert, but we still need to get the wall out of the air in the diary. Drop me a line, or type me a letter. Right, enough from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins, although I'm not going on Twitter that much these days, but I will still check in. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITR Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.